obviously he became the Sar HaTorah, and he became the individual who reached the pinnacle, the height of Torah knowledge. His beginning was very different. Moshe Rabbeinu, from the time he was an infant, was brought up in the palace of Paro, and he was, according to all looks, he was the heir apparent. He was magnificent as a child. He was beautiful. He had a Torah upon him and had a real aura about him, to the extent that Paro hand chose him to be his next in line. And in fact, Moshe Rabbeinu was to be the leader of Mitzrayim. He was to be the next Paro. And that's how he was brought up. But he was also much aware of the fact that he was Jewish. His mother was the one who actually brought him up in the palace. As you remember, when Moshe Rabbeinu was left in the basket, Miriam stood there, and when Bas Paro, the daughter of Paro, reached her hand out, brought him in, she brought this baby to all the Mitzri women. This baby, strangely enough, would not nurse from any of the Mitzri women. Finally, Miriam, who was right on call over there, said, "Would you like me to find a Jewish nursemaid? Maybe he'll take from them." Miriam went to her mother, Yocheved, and the person who actually brought up Moshe Rabbeinu in the palace was his own mother, Yocheved, and he was much aware of the fact that he was Jewish, and he was brought up in the palace as a Bar Yisrael. Now, that being said, there's an interesting pasuk that says that when he reached a certain age, when he reached the age, according to the Medrash, of 20 years old, the pasuk says as follows: Vayamahem, it was in those days, Vayigdal Moshe, Moshe grew up, Vayetze el Achav, he went out to his brothers, Vayar b'sivlosam, he saw their oppression, Vayar ish Mitzri maki ish evri me'echav, and he saw an Egyptian man hitting one of the Jewish people. And we're all familiar with that story. That's when Moshe Rabbeinu kills that Mitzri man, because that Mitzri man was wantonly oppressing a Jew without any cause, and was going to kill him. But what's interesting to note is what Rashi points out on that pasuk. The pasuk says, Vayar b'sivlosam, he saw their oppression. Moshe Rabbeinu was much aware of the oppression of the Jewish people. As a matter of fact, early on, as a youth, he petitioned Paro to give a day off to the Jewish people. He said, "You're going to work them to death. They won't be effective. Give them one day off." And he arranged for the day of Shabbos to be their day of rest, unbeknownst to Paro. His own heir-to-be was actually plotting for the good of the Jews. And there's no question that Moshe Rabbeinu was much aware of the suffering of the Jews. And therefore Rashi is bothered by, what does it mean, Vayar b'sivlosam, he saw their oppression? And Rashi says it doesn't mean he saw, doesn't even mean he became aware. Rather, nasan einav libo lios meitzar aleim. He placed his eyes and his heart to feel their pain. It wasn't a cognition, it was an emotion, it was a feeling. Vayar b'sivlosam means he placed his eyes and his heart, he felt their pain, he experienced it with them. And that's how Rashi explains the pasuk. And my Rishiva, Zeichat Tzadik L'Vrocha, asked a very interesting question on this Rashi. And that is that it would seem that this Rashi doesn't seem to be addressing the point. You see, Moshe Rabbeinu was a very kindly individual. Moshe Rabbeinu was very concerned for the good of the Klal Yisrael. It's almost a given that if a kindly, sensitive individual goes out and sees oppression, he's going to feel their pain. The blood was pouring forth in the street. This was the height of the oppression. This was the height of the torture of the Jewish people. And it wasn't just enslavement, it was beating, it was torture. And when Moshe Rabbeinu went out into the street, so to speak, what he saw was the bleeding, the torture of his nation. And yet Rashi seems to be saying that that did not move him. He had to take this extra step. He had to sort of nasan einav v'libo. He had to place his heart and he had to place his mind to feel it, to experience it. And then the problem is that shouldn't seem to be necessary. Just the experience, just walking out should make any individual feel their pain, should make them, any individual sense it. And yet it seems that Rashi is adding another step. There's something else that he did. Vayar b'sivlosam. He placed his heart and his mind to see it. And the question is, what is Rashi adding? What is Pshat here? And I'd like to see this evening if we could address this issue and get a better understanding of who this individual was. And let me begin with the following. Rabbi Moshe Chait, who was a Rishiva in Chavetz Chaim in Eretz Yisrael, once told the following story. A woman called him up from America with the following complaint. She said she sent a package with a young man to Israel. She asked this young man to bring it to such and such place, and the young man didn't deliver it. She called him up, and he still didn't deliver it. She called a second time, still nothing doing. It's been a month since he left the States. It's been a month, he hasn't delivered the package. Could Rabbi Chait please do something? So Rabbi Chait said, sure, I'll look into it. Rabbi Chait says he called this young man into his office and said, tell me, I don't understand. A woman called me, a package, what happened? So the fellow said, oh, I tell you, I feel so terrible. I first got here, I was so busy, and then I forgot. And then I got the phone call, and I said, yeah, I got to do it. And then somehow I got busy, I forgot again. And then I got busy again. She called me another time, and I started really feeling badly. And one day in the middle of Seder, I said, oh my goodness, I forgot to bring the package. So I said to my chavrusa, listen, I'm terribly sorry. I have to leave because I must deliver this package. It's been almost a month, and I can't wait here. And my chavrusa said, what do you mean? I said, listen, I feel terrible. I can't, this woman's waiting for the package, I can't not bring it. My chavrusa said, what's your problem? It's the middle of Seder. I said, yeah, but I feel like I'm not being a nice guy if I don't take care of this. My chavrusa said, where in the Torah does it say you have to be a nice guy? Now, Rabbi Chait screams when he says these words. Where in the Torah does it say you have to be a nice guy? That's the whole Torah. And I'd like to focus this evening on a very interesting observation. And that is that being a nice guy is not tangential. It's not incidental to Avodas Hashem. It's integral and a huge, huge focus. And as a matter of fact, almost the pinnacle and almost the measure of the man. But to understand that, I'd like to share with you a very simple observation. And that is that there are what I would call 3 levels in human relations. 3 levels in Ben Adam L'Chavero. The first level, interestingly enough, is being cognizant, being aware that there are other human beings on the planet. And I'll share with you what I mean. I have a friend of mine, Rabbi Palagon, who told me that his grandmother was living in a 2-family house. She was on the upstairs, there was a neighbor downstairs, and as it worked out, it was an older home, and she was working in the kitchen. There was a piece of flooring right by the sink that had worn out. She had asked her husband a number of times to replace it, repair it, never got around to it. Bottom line is she's cooking, getting ready Thursday night for Shabbos, and as she goes over to the sink, she puts her foot down, and her foot goes right through the flooring, right through into the ceiling underneath the woman's apartment down there. And she's an older woman, she's sort of injured, falls down, gets herself up, sort of regains her composure, sits down in a chair. A few moments later, there's a knock on the door. Please come in. It's the neighbor downstairs. The neighbor downstairs is holding a shoe. Is this your shoe? She says, yes, it is my shoe. Well, this shoe ruined my challah. The woman throws it down, storms out the door. Now that's an interesting reaction. Ma'am, did it ever occur to you that when there's a shoe coming down through your ceiling, there might be a foot attached to it? Did it ever occur to you that the woman whose foot came through the ceiling with that shoe that ruined your challah is an older woman? By the way, she suffered for the rest of her life because she was injured in that fall. The reason why the woman underneath came up infuriated, is this your shoe, was not because she was not because she was a nasty person. I guarantee if you came to her on a normal day, on a regular occasion, she'd be very sweet. If you delivered shalach money, she'd pinch your cheek and go, Bachala, here, let me give you a quarter. But the reason why she reacted that way was because she saw a shoe, but she didn't see the foot attached. And as ridiculous as it sounds, I believe there are many times when we are guilty of the same. When we fail to recognize that there are people, flesh and blood, mortal people, right around us. And I think the first lesson in Ben Adam L'Chaveru is remembering that there are people. Let me share with you another example because I find it telling. I was a high school Rebbe for many years, and as you know, high school guys run on a different code of behavior than the rest of the planet. And therefore you have to make certain rules that you don't make for anyone else. One of the rules in yeshiva was that if you punch another fellow, you have to pay a $50 knas. And it's a reasonable rule, I believe, anyway. It sounds rather reasonable. Maybe it's not enough money, you'd say fine. But point being, that was the rule. One guy is brought into the Menahel with the following complaint. He punched the guy in the jaw. And the Menahel said, okay, $50, pay it now. And the fellow said, wait a minute. The guy's kvetching. He's blowing its way out of proportion. I'll prove it to you, Rebbe. He says, my knuckles barely hurt me. So obviously he's just kvetching. It's not really a punch. It was just a tap, and he's just blowing it out of proportion. Fellow, it doesn't matter what your knuckles feels like. It matters what his jaw felt. But you see, my knuckles are the end of the world. That other part doesn't exist. I'm the world, and there's no one else here. And as comical as that sounds, as ridiculous as that sounds, I believe that many, many Ben Adam Lachaveru issues that we deal with are exactly because of that we fail to recognize that they're humans. I got a call. I was a single individual at the time, and it was quite a number of years ago by now. I get a call, and the person on the line said, I have a shidduch for you. You're a tzaddik, and for a tzaddik like you, I have a perfect shidduch. Now, I haven't received that many compliments that I quickly turned them down, so I said, what do you mean? And she went on to explain what a tzaddik I was. But she kind of learned a little bit the wrong pshat in the story. But let me tell you what the story was. I had been in camp that past summer as a learning Rebbe. There was a fellow who was in the camp who was basically autistic. But they had a program in the camp to try to mainstream a number of fellows. And this was one of the boys that they were trying to integrate, and they thought in a social environment, in a camp setting, it would be an ideal opportunity for this fellow to learn socially appropriate behaviors. Well, again, as I mentioned to you, high school boys have a different code of behavior than the rest of the world, and the first 2 days were a disaster. This guy would stand there, almost comatose, and everybody would mock him, make fun of him. It was horrific. It was gefährlich. It was getting to the point. It was really, really, it was out of control. The director, Rabbi Rakov, asked somebody to take this young man after Minyan for a walk. They took this fellow out, and he addressed the teenage. We were about maybe 150 fellows in teenage. And he said as follows. He said, Rabosai, I just want you to know one thing. There's a young man, his life is literally in our hands. If we take him under our wings, if we make him our pet project, we can turn him around, we can make him a regular, accepted member of society. But if not, Rahman al-Islam, we could destroy him. I just want you guys to understand that. You could feel the change. It was like a revolution. They adopted him. They made him a member. My particular learning group that I was teaching actually really made him a member of the group. He would sit there in our learning group. They became the buddy whenever the guys would play ball. They take him along. He became a regular member, and he flourished that summer, and he really came out. Now, this person's aunt heard Schaefer was giving the learning group. Schaefer's group kind of adopted him. She assumed I was a major player in it. Again, as I say, I don't get that many compliments, and I refused, but I wasn't going out at the time. Bottom line is, the shidduch didn't go through, but this is the point. The point is that this young man's life was changed, but I want you to hear the observation. 150 teenage fellows were not cruel. I'll prove to you they weren't cruel, because the minute they understood what was at stake, they turned around on a dime. And they became really Balei Chesed. They devoted themselves, and this guy became an adopted member of everybody's life. So it wasn't that they were cruel. It wasn't that they were nasty. It was that until someone explained to them what was going on, he was not in the category of a human being, and their normal sensitivities didn't function. And I think there are many, many times when be'etzim we are nice guys, we're nice people, but there are many times when we do things that are inappropriate, or maybe even in a category of nasty, not because we're not nice, but because we fail to remember that that other person is a human being. And I think the first step, when we discuss any serious Ben Adam L'Chaveiro, is remembering that the other party is made of flesh and blood, the other party has feelings, the other party has very, very great sensitivities, maybe even almost as sensitive as I. And that, by the way, is a huge step forward. And that if I could remember, would change the way I deal with people. And I'm telling you, I believe it's a tremendous yesod for Ben Adam L'Chaveiro. And that's yesod number one, that we're dealing with people. Yesod number two is a little bit different. Yesod number two is something that Dale Carnegie makes a very good point of. By the way, in high school shiur, I would always recommend Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. But I was always shy to do it publicly outside of a yeshiva setting because I didn't know. And then I saw in Rabbi Miller's Sefer, he goes on and on about this book, and it happens to be a fantastic book. There are some points where he's a little bit off, he's not quite Mapidas Torah, but it's a wonderful, wonderful read. In any case, there's a point he makes as follows. He says, I, speaking of himself, like strawberries and cream. However, when I go fishing, I put worms on the hook. Because fish like worms. You see, it's not about what I like, it's what about It's about what the fish likes. So he puts worms on his hooks, not strawberries and cream. And gentlemen, that is a huge, huge point. You see, I have feelings, I have sensitivities, I approach things, but that doesn't mean you feel the same way that I do. And the second principle in any forward-moving ben adam lechaveru human relations is understanding what you're feeling. When I'm dealing with other people, number one, I have to be aware that they're human, that they're here. Number two, what is it that this person is feeling? And what is he sensing, what's going on in his world at this time? And that, my friends, is not so simple. I'll give you an illustration of this. Anytime you're in a negotiation, if you're brought up in New York City, for sure, you know that you got to have yourself a tough New York City lawyer on your side of the negotiating table, right? You sit down there, and the first thing your tough lawyer does is, my client is not selling for less than $2 million. And he bangs his fist on the table, and you feel real secure because you got yourself a real tough negotiator. And unbeknownst to you is the fact that your negotiating pal over there probably made the first huge mistake in any negotiating situation. Because the first primary yesod in negotiating has nothing to do with being tough, nothing to do with posturing. It has everything to do with knowing what's going on in the other person's world, what they're looking for. Let me give you a good, for instance. Thomas Edison invented the universal stock ticker. This was the first mechanical way of basically recording stock transactions. And it was a huge revolution in the stock market world. And at 23 years of age, after inventing it, patenting it, he went to sell it to a fellow, General Lefferts. General Lefferts was then the head of the Gold and Stock Telegraph Company, and Edison didn't know how much to ask. On the one hand, he felt the value of the machine was $5,000, but that was such a huge sum of money in those days. He thought maybe $3,000, $5,000. Finally, he made up he's going to ask $5,000. He went into the meeting, and as he was about to say the words, he recognized it was too high a number, and he couldn't quite stammer out the number. So when General Lefferts said, "How much do you want for it?" Edison just naively said, Why don't you tell me what you had in mind?" At which point, Lefferts said, "How does $40,000 sound to you?" Now, Tom, he writes in his book afterwards, when he heard that number, he almost fainted. He sort of stammered out, "Okay, it sounds about right." And they signed the deal. He sold this machine. Done deal. After the papers are signed, General Lefferts turns to Edison and says, "Young man, you're a fool." Why? "I was prepared to offer you 10 times that amount." To which Thomas Edison said, "You may be right, but you're not that smart yourself, because I was prepared to accept 1/10 of what you were offered." So, you see, the yesod is not being tough. The yesod is not walking in hard line. The yesod is knowing what's the other person's position. When you're going to buy a house, and the asking price is $450,000, and you want the house, who's selling it? If it's an older couple, and you see that sort of nostalgic look in their eyes because they brought up their kids in this house, and you bring your little children in, and you casually mention the fact, of course, you're always welcome to come back anytime from Florida. You come up here, you're always welcome to come to our home to visit. You just saved yourself $50,000 or maybe more on the price of that house. Why? Because money is not the object to those people. It's their home. It's the attachment. But if you're not paying attention to what's going on in the other person's life, if you're not aware of their situation, you can't negotiate properly, but surely you can't practice ben adam lechaveru. You can't be involved in a serious attempt to better that other person's situation, to help them, to deal with them in a proper manner. So the second principle of ben adam lechaveru is knowing the other person. And I'll share with you something very interesting from my Rosh Hashiva Zatzal. The Rosh Hashiva would walk into Blatcha, and I remember this more than one time, on a number of times, occasions, the Rosh Hashiva would walk in and say, "Ay, this person fooled me. I can't believe it, he fooled me." And when the Rosh Hashiva would say this, I remember sitting there. I was a young man in my 20s, and I said, something doesn't make sense here. Here's this man who's in his 60s, a Gadol B'Yisrael. His wisdom is manifest. Everyone sees it. And he often talks about the fact how people fool him. Yet nobody fools me. What's pshat? And later on, I realized what pshat was. You see, I take people on face value. What the Rosh Hashiva would do was study the person. Who is this person? What's his nature? What's he about? And then he would draw steps. This type of person in this given situation will probably act this way, will probably react this way. This is the course of behavior that I expect. And there were many times when the Shiva was correct. There are some times when people fooled him, because people are people, and people sometimes do finicky, sort of fickle things, and they do things out of character. But you see, what the Shiva did was study the person, make certain steps in assuming if this is the nature of this person, this is how they'll behave, and because of that he was sometimes fooled. But that's a huge step forward. Studying a person, asking what's going on in their world, what motivates them, what are they about, being sensitive to another human being. And the second step in Ben Al Mechaveru is understanding the other person, putting myself in their shoes, feeling what's going on in their world. By the way, I believe it'll solve 50% of fights in a marriage. 50% of marital strife will be solved with one simple exercise. The next time you get into a fight with your husband or your wife, try the following. You're yelling, you're gently remarking, and your wife is gently remarking back to you. Stop. Just when it gets to that heated point, and say, okay, we're switching roles. I'm going to argue your point, and you're going to argue my point. Okay, let's start. Well, what you were saying, what were you saying again? Yeah, what was your point? You see, invariably, or at least most of the time, the issues are not clearly spelled out, and I don't understand where she's coming from, and I don't know what's really bothering her, because if I did, assuming she's a reasonable person, likely she's making a good point. See, most of the time the emotions and whatever else happens is going on, so I'm not even listening, I'm not even hearing, I'm not even attuned to what's really bothering her, and she, on the flip side, in a simple exercise called let's swap. I'm going to argue your position, you argue my position, does a world. Why? Because if I'm arguing her position, I have to hear it, I have to think about it, I have to understand it, I have to hear what she's saying. And that is a huge step forward. And this second premise is that a huge step forward in Ben Al Mechaveru is feeling where that person is coming from. The first yesod is recognizing that there are humans on the other side. The second step is understanding what's driving them and what's motivating them. Now, if we were to stop here, at this point, I'm telling you, I guarantee that this will change so many exchanges and relationships that you have. If I could train myself to always remember there's another human being on the other side, if I could train myself to ask if there's a shoe that fell into the batter, there must have been a foot attached to it. If I could train myself not to feel my knuckles, but to understand there's a face over there and it probably hurts his jaw far more than it does my knuckles, that would change the way I relate to people, it would change the way I deal with people, and that would make me a very different person. But that's only step one and step two in Ben Al Mechaveru, and that's from a secular vantage point, and that's before you have a Torah to tell us how a human being really should act. The third stage, which is really the Torah perspective, is leagues, miles beyond that. And that is as follows. There is a Ramban that asks a famous question. The pasuk says, "V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha," you should love your friend like yourself. The Ramban said it cannot be. He says very simply, I cannot possibly love you like myself. It's against human nature. My interests are my interests, my needs are my needs. If you're not quite sure I'm correct, imagine the following. Imagine you're in a dorm room and your roommate wakes you up 3 o'clock in the morning and says, Shmuel, Shmuel, what? Shmuel, what do you want? Shmuel, I'm thirsty. So get yourself a drink of water. But I'm tired. Can you get me a drink of water? What are you, crazy? You want me to get out of bed because you're thirsty? You're tired? Are you nuts? The Ramban says, of course I can't love you like myself. The Torah would never demand it. Not only that, he says, Rabbi Kiva, who's the author of that statement, also says, Chayecha kodmim. You have an obligation to take care of your own needs first. Says the Ramban, that's not pshat in the mitzvah. The Ramban says, pshat in the mitzvah is eliminate all jealousy. If you eliminate all jealousy from your heart, what you'll quickly see is you want the best for your friend. Listen, I want you to have everything. I want you to have wealth and honor and learning and atzlach and all in Yonim. Why shouldn't I? The only reason why I wouldn't want that is because I'm competing with you. But assuming I'm not competing with you, assuming that I get it, that Hashem runs the world, and Hashem gives out according to who the person is, then I want everything for you. I want you to have atzlach and all in Yonim. I want you to have wealth. I want you to have popularity. I want you to have huge success in every endeavor. I wish for you everything imaginable. Says the Ramban, that's pshat in the pasuk. It doesn't say v'ahavta es re'echa kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself. V'ahavta lire'echa, love towards your friend. Feel the same sense of I want everything good for me. I want everything good for him. I want everything for me that should work out for the best. I want everything for him to work out for the best. And the Shiva would often say the measure of this is, are you with him in his simcha? Are you with him in his pain? When a person has a huge, huge turn of mazel, there's a daughter that he's been waiting to marry off for the longest time, and then finally there's the shidduch, how happy are you with him? He feels joy. Do you feel that joy? Do you feel with him? Then it indicates that you're with him. When a person has misfortune, something turns for the opposite, and then he's in pain, do you feel his pain? If you're with him in his joy, if you're with him in your pain, then you're with him, you're one with him. That's a kiyum of Avtaracha Kamocha, but that means I and he are one. And my friends, I believe that that's Pshat Moshe Rabbeinu. You see, Moshe Rabbeinu felt the pain of the Jewish people when he was in the palace. He knew that it was his nation, his brothers that were being tortured, that were being oppressed, but it wasn't the same being in the comfort of the satin and silk as being out there in the sands of Mitzrayim. And when he went out there, it was Nasan Libo Ve'enav. He placed his mind and his heart because he wanted to feel it. It wasn't just seeing it. It wasn't enough to see the torture. He wanted to feel it. He placed his mind and his heart with him because he bonded. This is my people. This is my nation. And he was Makayim, this mitzvah. This mitzvah of Havdarecha Kamocha means feel my brother's pain, feel his joy. And the Medrash describes what it was like when Moshe Rabbeinu went out that day. Moshe Rabbeinu went over to an old man and said, "Oh, you're carrying such a heavy load, let me take it." And he took the load off that man and put it on his own shoulders to carry it. He saw another fellow carrying a heavier load. He said, "Oh, you can't do this, I have to do it." Oily, he said, "Lule, I should die. Better I should die than witnesses." He began crying bitter tears because he felt the pain, put his heart, put his eyes with his brothers. And my friends, that's not something that comes so easily, not something that comes so naturally. But when a person does this, then they reach a very, very exalted state of being. The Maral points out a very significant point. The pasuk says, "Vayigdal," he became great. Says the Maral, what do you mean? Not just he grew up, not just he became big, he became great, because this is the process of greatness. You ever notice that all of the Gedolim, all of the Avos were tested with chesed? In fact, David HaMelech was chosen because he showed great kindness to animals. Moshe Rabbeinu was chosen, why? Because he ran after the sheep, and when the sheep was exhausted and tired, and then Moshe Rabbeinu said, "Oh, I didn't realize you were running because you're tired." Then Moshe Rabbeinu picked that sheep up, put it on his shoulder, and began walking him back to Yisro's son. That's when Hashem said, if you're that careful about the feelings of an animal, then you're the manig, you'll be the leader. You ever notice that all of the Gedolei Yisrael were very, very nice guys? It's not because it's incidental, not because it's tangential, it's because it's essential. And the reason really is quite simple. The reason is because the measure of all greatness is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If you want to know the measure of anything great, it's based on how close it is to Hashem. The midah with which Hashem created this world, the midah with which Hashem runs this world is chesed, loving kindness. And the more that a human being becomes great, the more that he emulates Hashem. By definition, that means he has to be giving and kind and concerned for others. The reason why the Gedolim throughout the generations, the great people, the Avos were such nice people, was because that's the pinnacle of greatness. That's what it's about. And the secret to it is exactly this point, feeling somebody else's pain. You know, it's not always that simple. You go to a wedding and you're happy, but that's not enough. It's when you go to a wedding and you see the chassan and you feel his joy. You're there anyway. You're going to be happy anyway. But it's, I'm with him. I feel his joy. That's a huge step forward. And if that's a huge step forward, try it at a shiva. One time in my life, I believe I fulfilled properly Nicham Avelim. Not long ago, a friend of my mother was sitting shiva. My mother passed away about 10 years ago. And this woman was sitting shiva for a son of hers who was younger than I. And I remember this young man. He was a number of years younger. And when I walked into the shiva house, I vividly remember babysitting for him when he was a little boy. And I can't describe what the scene was like. Now, this woman, again, knew me since I'm a little boy as well, and she knew that I had gone off to yeshiva, knew that I went into Rabbanus, and when I came in, she said, "Come, sit down. I've been bothered by so many questions. People have told me answers. You can tell me, you can answer the questions, please. Why did he die?" Now, if you listen to the Shmuz, you know that I don't shy away from this question of death. There was a Shmuz 163, only the good die young. On a philosophical level, it's not a very difficult question to deal with. But when it's a woman who's mourning over her son who was just recently married and died, it's not the time for philosophy. And I didn't say anything. I only said, what can we say? What can we say? And I sat with her for a while, and as I just sort of discussed her son a little bit, after maybe 20 minutes I got up and I said, I came here because my mother would have been here. And I burst out crying. I couldn't stop the tears, and I walked out. My father told me later that this woman spoke to him and said she had a tremendous nechama, she had a tremendous consolation from that visit. It's feeling another person's pain, being with them. And if you fulfill it once in your life, it's pretty good. But what the Torah expects from us is to fulfill it on some level on a regular basis. And what that means is to break past the normal barriers. You see, an infant, by definition, is utterly and completely selfish. A baby is hungry, it cries. The baby's diaper is wet, it cries. All the baby knows is its own needs. The trick of growing up is to learn to be other-centered. But the trick of growing up is learning that it's not just about me. It's learning that there are other humans in the world, learning that other humans have feelings, and learning how to do this very difficult task called feeling his pain as my pain, feeling his joy as my joy, bonding with that person, and that's a fulfillment of Ahavta L'Recha Kamocha, and it's one of the greatest marks of a human. It's actually arguably the pinnacle, the height of human greatness. When you could be with another person in their joy, be with another person in their pain, that is the greatness of the human, because you're emulating Hashem. On your level, you're acting as Hashem. Hashem is the Meitiv. Hashem is Imo Nochi B'Tzara. That's the midah with which Hashem runs the world. And when you're doing that, you're emulating Hashem. And it's something that doesn't come that naturally. I'll share with you an interesting story. The Stipler Gaon, when he was older, was kimat deaf. Had very, very little hearing. And he would often be unaware of people coming into the room. And the Kamenetz of Rosh Yeshiva needed to discuss something with the Stipler that was very pressing. So he came to the Stipler's daughter and said, "Can I speak with the Stipler?" The Stipler's daughter said, "I'll tell you, my father is now saying Tehillim for some cholim, and you can wait. And when he's done, you're more than welcome to speak to him." So the Kamenetz of Rosh Yeshiva sat down and waited. And he described, and he saw the Stipler holding it to him with tears in his eyes, crying for this chola. And he saw there was a stack of names. So after saying two parakim of Tehillim, the Stipler picked up name, said a Mishaberach, and at that point the Kamenetz of Rosh Yeshiva was prepared to go over to the Stipler, because he had said the two parakim, said the Mishaberach, and obviously he was done. But then he saw that he took that name, moved it aside, and picked up the second name. You see, he didn't say the Mishaberach for the whole stack of names together. He didn't say the two parakim of Tehillim for the whole stack. He said two parakim of Tehillim, said the Mishaberach for each name by name for 2 hours. The Kamenetz of Rosh Yeshiva sat there waiting for the Stipler to be finished saying Tehillim. These are people he never met, people he didn't know their names other than the name on the paper. But that's the Gadol's feeling. If someone brings a name, a chola, the chola masukan, he feels the pain, he feels the situation, and that's the reaction of a heart that's filled with giving, with kindness, with bonding love. I think there's a tremendous lesson to learn from this pasuk. You see, Moshe Rabbeinu was a very nice person, but that wasn't enough. Vayar b'sivlosa means nasan einov libo. He went out there and felt their feelings. He felt their pain, put his heart because it's not enough to just be aware, it's not enough to just feel it. You have to really, really live their pain. And I think there's really 3 steps in becoming a full functioning human being. The first step is to be cognizant, to be aware that the people that I deal with are people, that they're not just machines, and to be aware that if there's a shoe that comes through the ceiling, likely there's a foot attached to it. If there's a knuckles, my knuckles connecting to somebody's jaw, it's not about my knuckles. And understanding that a human being might be looking at things very, very differently than I, maybe experiencing things very differently than I, is a huge step forward. Beyond just understanding that they're humans, you have to understand Dale Carnegie's rule, and that is because I like strawberries and cream does not mean I feed that to the fish, because fish don't. And the first rule in negotiating is understanding the other person's position, and that's certainly the first rule in Benanu Machavero. It doesn't matter how I feel, it doesn't matter how I look, it matters how she feels about it. And that, my friends, is a huge, huge step forward, because it's very easy to be a nice person to people who are like me, to people who act like I do, to people who look at things as I do. But it's a much more difficult task to begin looking at the world through another person's eyes, to be able to feel another person's perspective and look at the world through their eyes. But both of those are still within the world of the secular, within the world of a nice guy in the world outside. If you want to master the world of the nice guy from the Torah's perspective, it's a big step forward beyond that. And that is feeling another person's pain, being with them in the pain, being with them in the joy, being completely bonded with them. Is it supernatural? It's not supernatural, but it requires focusing. It means throughout my day, thinking, there's another human being. Can I share their burden? What does it feel like? Am I with him in his joy, in his sorrow? The Shiva would often advise us to do a chesed daily. One chesed. Not for your wife, not for your kids, but do a chesed specifically outside your normal requirements. It can be for your wife or your children, but something beyond what you're normally supposed to do, because you train yourself in feeling, you train yourself in giving, but you have to train yourself because it doesn't come natural. If you want to know where in the Torah does it say to be a nice guy, it's Kol HaTorah Kula, because that is the matara, that is the goal, that's the tachlis, that's the end result. Because the greatness of the human is how much he's doma, how much a person is like Hashem. The measure of that is how much you act like Hashem. Hashem is the meitiv, the giver. The more giving, the more kindly, the more you feel another person's pain, the more you've reached the pinnacle. I'd like to close with a story that I think well encapsulates this concept. The story is of the Chavetz Chaim. A bocher learning in the Chavetz Chaim Yeshiva was ill. And he went to various doctors, and after going from doctor to doctor, no one could find the cure. He finally comes to the Chavetz Chaim and says, I don't know what to do. I'm sick. The doctor said, tell me it's grave, I could die from it. They don't know what to do. The Chavetz Chaim, he says, looked at me and says, I can help you. But you have to promise me that you will not tell a soul what's going to happen. Young Bacher, he agrees. Chavetz Chaim said, listen to me. You're going to go to such and such town. There is a little known tzaddik over there. I want you to go to that tzaddik and ask him to daven for you. Bacher says, sure. He goes to that town, finds this tzaddik, asks the tzaddik to daven for him, and within a few weeks after that, miraculously he's cured. Better, continues learning, eventually gets married. Many, many years later, his wife's sister becomes sick. Ironically, with the similar symptoms to that which he had many years ago as a bacher. And he mentions to his wife sort of casually, I had that same disease when I was single, when I was a boy, and the Chavetz Chaim took care of me. His wife said, what? Never mind. His wife started bothering him, started pestering him day after day. It's my sister. You have to tell me what happened. You have to tell me what the cure. You have to tell me. I don't know. I went to the Chavetz Chaim. Chavetz Chaim told me to go to this and this tzaddik, to daven. I went to that tzaddik, cured me, and Baruch Hashem was all better. So the wife quickly made some inquiries. Where is the tzaddik? Nebuch, as it turns out, that tzaddik had passed away many years ago. And the wife was despondent. She didn't know what to do. As it turns out, a little while after that, this man himself becomes sick with the same symptoms that he had as a bacher in yeshiva. And he realizes what happened. I promised Chofetz Chaim I wouldn't tell, and I blew it. I opened my mouth. I can't believe I did that. I can't believe it. He says, what am I going to do? I'm going to die. I can't believe what a fool I was. He says to his wife, I'm going back to the Chofetz Chaim to ask Mechila. I'm going to go back and find out what I can do. He gets on a train, goes back to Ranin, shows up at the Chofetz Chaim and says, Rebbe, do you remember me? Of course. Do you remember I was sick many years ago? Yes, of course. And do you remember you cured me? Yes. Well, Rebbe, I have to admit, Shafier asked me not to say anything, but I said something, and lo and behold, the same disease has come back to me. Chofetz Chaim said, "Oy, when you came to me so many years ago, I was a younger man. I fasted 40 days. I'm an old man now. I can't do that any longer. What can I do for you?" My friends, I want you to hear the story. You see, the story is that this young bacher came to the Chofetz Chaim, and the Chofetz Chaim saw that he was very, very sick. And the Chofetz Chaim covered his tracks. What the Chofetz Chaim did was take upon himself to fast for 40 days. But he didn't want the world to know about it, so he covered his tracks by saying, go visit this and this tzaddik, that'll be the cure. But that wasn't the story. The story was the Chofetz Chaim felt his pain and said, I'll take upon myself to fast for 40 days for another bacher. And that is something that you see throughout the Gedolim, throughout the Torah giants, this tremendous caring, giving. And it's not something that a person's born with. It's not something that a person just acquires. It's something that a person works on for weeks, for months, for years. And eventually, if you do this often enough and long enough, learn to feel another person's pain, learn to share their joy, you become a kindly, giving person. You become the Torah personality. Hashem grant us wisdom, understanding, ability to put this into practice. Who has questions for me?
How does a person really feel someone else's pain or joy for that matter? So let's say you walk into the house, you're not that happy for the guy, or you walk into the shiva home, you're not that sad. So how do you really feel it?
See, that step alone is huge. Just saying to myself, Salim, I want to feel his joy. Let me think about this for a minute. Let me think. Oh my goodness, he's 35 years old. He was looking for a shidduch for a long time. I wonder what it was like. I wonder what it was like to feel like a fifth wheel, to be there always alone, to be always feeling uncomfortable. I wonder what it was, and now he found his way. What? That process is, once you start doing it, automatically you start feeling it. And the opposite, feeling the pain means, let me think of it. Let me just stop my busyness. We're all so busy doing, happening. Let me stop my busyness and just think, what's it like for that person? And I wonder what it's like, to lose a child. I can't even think. I wonder what it's like to be... But that process is huge. See, the big secret here is that we're all nice guys. There's nobody here who's not a nice person. The problem is developing the sensitivity. The way to develop the sensitivity is to feel the other person's pain, to feel their situation. How do you do that? By stopping and thinking. What's it like for him? What's it like for her? What is she going through? What is going on in her mind? So that process automatically... See, again, that to me was a big finish of the high school guys in camp. They were all nice guys. But it wasn't until somebody turned the light bulb on and said, that's a human being. He's not somebody to mock, not somebody to make fun. And I'm telling you, they would have destroyed this person. The first 2 days of camp, it was horrible to watch. Guys are very cutting and very, very damaging in their words. And they were really, really, the barbs were being shot. But the minute someone said to them, don't you understand he's a human and we can change his life? They turned on a dime. It's not because they weren't nice guys, haraya they were. But it's that sensitivity, thinking, understanding. So I guess that's sort of the answer. Yeah.
There are times when, for example, in an average day-to-day situation, you'll want to negotiate with somebody to ask for something, ask a price of something. And often what happens, or what I've discovered, is that if you act sometimes nice and polite, the person looks at you and says, you're a weak person here. And I'm going to take advantage of that. So how do you deal with a situation like that? You want to be nice. On the other hand, you feel it's going to hurt you.
Okay, I'm not against posturing, I'm not against, maintaining a certain position. I'm not, but that's very carefully chosen as a strategy. You see, I'm tough and I'm going to negotiate the toughest deal I can. That's a mistake. because that's just one behavior, which may be appropriate in some situations. But you see, the key is, what does he want? What does this person want out of this deal? It's not always money. It's not always position. It's not always honor. For different people, it's different things, And again, back to the house situation. It turns out that there are a couple that are going through a divorce. Ooh, that's a whole different situation that they're under than a regular couple who's moving to Cincinnati. So it's not about being tough or being soft or any of the above. It's about understanding where they're coming from. Now, again, in negotiating, there are times when you have to posture. You have times you have to bluff. There are times when you have to, pretend a certain position. But again, that's because I know where they're at, or I assume they're at this point. Therefore, I have to put up this front. But it's calculated. It's not this instinctive toughness. It's a Marine expression. It's easy to be hard. It's hard to be smart. That's, and again, that's really just in negotiating. But the bigger principle for us in terms of Ben Am L'Chaveru is understanding that the key is not how I act. The key is understanding where this person is at, how they feel, how they sense, and then reacting to that. That answer a little? Yeah.
Can I ask an aura and a possible svara?
Aura and a svara, please.
It's interesting that Moshe was nasan einav v'libo. We're told by ourselves, lo sasur achrei levavchem v'achrei einechem. Where a person's nagua to himself naturally, where a person's biased to himself naturally, his heart leads his eyes. He's completely in touch with his desires, with his own needs and wants and desires. And so they direct his eyes to search out, like it says there, the sarsurim of the lev. But what you're talking about is to do the reverse. For me to come in contact and to feel empathy, complete empathy to someone else, I've got to work from the outside in and do one of these chitzonius mafilas apnimus, order my eyes to see first, and only then could Moshe's heart, Moshe had to move his eyes first to overcome the natural reaction of things which are disgusting to him, force himself to look, and then force himself to really internalize it.
You give me the Shmuz next week. Very good. I mean, it's a very good point. I hear you saying it's very, very well said. Whereas, put that in the footnotes. Okay. Any other questions, observations, thoughts? Yeah.
I hope I can question this right. Make sense. This is a case where the giver really felt and helped the person emotionally as well as materialistically, physically, and at least over the years the receiver took it for granted, and the giver came to a point where this is so much what I can give without starting to get hurt myself. The receiver started to get angry, I am not getting any more, and started to flip the coin and go against the giver, therefore hurting the giver a lot and forcing the giver to retrieve that chesed and develop anger feelings towards the receiver.
Welcome to the human condition.
Thank you. I can explain myself.
Yeah, I hear exactly what you're saying. Now, in a perfect world, if we were dealing with Malachei Asharis, with angels, the answer is to give and to recognize that my job is to emulate Hashem. So, for instance, very few human beings have the right to wake up in the morning and say, God, you owe me life, well-being, health, money, car, this is what's coming to me because of all the great things that I've done. And if anybody's arrogant enough to think that they're really entitled to it, I have a simple observation to make. When you're a baby, let's say a day old, what did you do exactly that warranted you being created? I'm such a great person. Well, I'm just a 6-hour-old. I did nothing that warranted Hashem creating me. I did nothing that warranted Hashem giving me eyes, hands, mouth, giving me sense of flavor, sense of taste. All of the things that I receive from Hashem are matnas chinam, are a free present given to me. And Hashem is the meitiv whether I'm deserving or not. Hashem gives without expecting a return, because there's nothing that the human can do to give back to Hashem. Hashem needs nothing. And there's no sense of entitlement that really says, I'm entitled to this because of anything. So understanding that Hashem is the ultimate meitiv without it being deserving, and without expecting anything back. If my role is to emulate Hashem, then again, in theory at least, the idea of the real ultimate Baal Chesed is to give without expecting anything in return, and to give in a totally unwarranted situation. Now, that's in a theoretical world. In the real world, it's very, very difficult to give because I have emotions. And if I give somebody and they're kofei tov, they're ingrates, they don't appreciate it, I get very, that's really nasty. That's really not, and I get very involved and I get very emotional, and therefore it is a very difficult thing being a human being, and requires an awful lot of wisdom. The real, one of the great keys in being a successful human being is being wise and practicing wisdom, especially in human relations, because the reality is that we're all sensitive, we all have our pet peeves, or we all have our issues, and being sensitive, being aware is a very, very great thing. And by the way, if you're not sure, wait till you get to the stage. If you're there already, then for sure, if you're a father-in-law or mother-in-law, if you're not there yet, just watch it. If you're a son-in-law, you'll know what I'm talking about. Meaning, receiving is not so easy to do. I was, Baruch Hashem, we were first married, we were in Kolo, and my father was very, very generous, and he gave me serious nefesh, he gave us money, a certain amount of money. It was hard for me to take. I knew he was totally, totally generous, totally giving, and I'm telling you, it was hard for me to take. Even though we're totally on the same page, we both recognize the importance of it, but it's not so easy to take. Being sensitive that when you're giving something to somebody, they may be uncomfortable with that is a big step forward. So, again, I don't know if it's an answer to your question, because it's the human condition, but the reality is being wise and being very, very attuned can go a long way, hopefully, to dealing with it.
Well, in this case, particularly, the receiver took it for granted, never recognized his receiver, liked it, continued receiving it, and when he saw that he's not receiving so much, turned it over and started to walk. How come you're not giving more?
As an aside,
the receiver never recognizes it. He wants to receive, expect to receive, wants to receive.
My son Yoel is now 4.5 years old, and we made a birthday party for him when he was first born. I gathered together my older kids and we made a birthday party. We bought a cake, put a 0 candle on top, lit it, and we had a real Emissa birthday party, the only one in our family. And then I realized something very interesting at that party. And at that party was my 16-year-old daughter, my 14-year-old daughter, my kid. I had 5 other kids, and I looked around and I realized something, that I've been a father over a range of time. And I recognized something very, very interesting. When I was a young father, my daughter who's now 20, the word no was almost never said in the house. I wanted to give her and my wife what we gave and gave and gave. As we got older, we started practicing, and now I'm good at it, saying the word no, no, no. No, in fact, I practice in the mirror. No, no. Because it's not so easy to say. You have to really get those lips moving. And now when my kids ask me something, almost instinctively, I say no, without even thinking. Because I want them to hear the word no, because it's an avla. It's actually a disservice when a father or a mother just gives and gives and gives. And you're training your children to expect. You're training them not to appreciate. And it's very important to know when to say no. So, again, I don't know exactly that situation you're referring to. But again, wisdom is the key to human relations. Being sensitive, feeling the other person's pain, being with them, but you have to be wise, because if you're not wise, you don't understand what's going on with them, you don't understand what's in their world, and you, with all good intentions, oftentimes can mess situations up. Yeah?
You said that these qualities have to be trained, they don't come naturally. I heard from a Rebbe, and I think I read in the Musaf Sefer, that there are 2 types of people in the world. There are givers and there are takers. Nothing in between. One or the other. So how do you train a child who's a taker to be really sensitive to that other person, to be the giving person, if they're just in that category of being a taker, not a giver?
So I'm not sure it's all so black and white. In other words, first of all, I don't believe everyone is either all giver, all taker. I'm very sure that there's a lot of gray spectrum between the black and the white. And I'm not even sure that anyone's at all either a giver or a taker. This I know. Every human being that you'll meet has a nature within them to be giving and kindly, because that's part of the nature of a human. We also, every one of us also have a natural inclination to being selfish and nasty and not being concerned about anyone else. Now, the question is the balance. And really the question is, how do we bring the giving nature out? And I think more than anything, letting that child feel the other person's situation, training them to feel what it's like to be on the receiving end, training them to feel what it's like to be the kid who's left out of the playgroup, what's it like to be the odd man out, what's it like to be the kid who's made fun of. Because I think invariably what you find is that the nastiest people, when they actually get it, that it's really not comfortable to be on that end, and that's a person, and like me, I think usually, I mean, with the exception of hardened criminals or really, chronic difficult people, the vast majority of the people certainly that we deal with are nice guys. And that's, again, the biggest chiddush is that when you're dealing with nice guys can be either nasty or nice, depending on whether they get it. Again, that woman who was, on the receiving end of that shoe, I guarantee you was a wonderful person. Balas chesed, nice. The problem is that she saw the shoe but not the foot. And that's the point. We all do that. It's learning to be sensitive to the fact that there's a foot attached to the shoe, there's a face, not just the knuckles. It's just changing my perspective. So again, with a child, I think more than anything, it's trying to bring that child to the awareness what it's like to be on the other side. What does it feel like? What is it? And then the natural giving kindness, I think, comes out. All right, one last question, and we'll Marv. The last question, yeah.
Does the same technique work for your own personal selfishness? I mean, especially I'm thinking in the context of, wife wants you to stay home, you want to go learn, you're going to benefit from the learning that will ultimately give to the relationship, and those types of situations. So dealing with your own personal selfishness, where you're not at the point where you feel like your own growth is getting diluted by always trying to give, and then you're not.
So what you're asking is a very complicated question because there's a lot of components to it. Point me a little bit more. Give me a little bit more pointed.
I guess what I'm saying is that, in one sense, you're saying that identifying with the other person is one of the best ways to help become a better giver.
Yep.
But what happens when you feel like maybe it's similar to what Yehuda was saying, is that it's almost to your detriment. That maybe in a sense you're missing out on further growth because you feel like you're always. I don't know.
Okay, in a marriage situation, there are definite needs to set up parameters, guidelines, to have discussions, and sort of lay down certain basic, understandings. So, in other words, whether it's, let's say, going out to learn at night, or it's who's doing which chore, or who's taking out the garbage. Everybody knows whose job is that? It's the husband's job until you have kids. I have a teenage boy. I haven't taken out the garbage in years now. Shalom Aleichem, garbage. Let's go. Make sure you get it. I'm kidding. But the point is, though, you do. Obviously, there's a need to negotiate certain expectations, certain parameters, and being kindly and being giving doesn't mean being a doormat. In other words, meaning to say, a Baal Chesed is not a person who has no life, has no self-interest. There are things I do, there's certain things I'm obligated in, certain things that I'm going to do. I'll negotiate with my wife or with my neighbors or whatever. But at the same time, learning to be sensitive to another's pain, learning sensitive to another's joy, I don't think it's contradictory. In other words, there are parameters, there are ways to behave, and there's also sensitivity, at the same time. All right, I think we'll done. Again, if anyone's interested.